My thanks to the organizers for having received me here, and to all of you for having taken the time to come and listen to such a long lecture. I will try to share my experiences over the last 30 years of an architectural practice that may be a little unconventional because not only have I come from a very different culture perhaps, given that my practice began in India 30 years ago, I have, of course, been interacting with the developed countries and the industrialized way of making architecture. I thought it would be useful to share with you a bit more personally also the journey and the importance that I place now as an architect in building knowledge and building community along with building buildings. The thing is that, of course, there are two meanings in building knowledge. One is the knowledge about building, and the other is the building of the knowledge. I mean, look, everywhere we have all witnessed people's demonstrations recently about climate change, and I can save a lot of minutes to explain the problem because we all know now and agree that there is a huge environmental problem in the way we are making our buildings. Since the last few decades, we know the problem and we continue to make the buildings in the same way. In the time I graduated as an architect, at that time I had felt that we need to invest in knowledge to be able to make buildings in a less harmful way for the environment. Today, I think the problem is not about the knowledge. The problem is we know that it's not good and we still do it. So I do want to talk about that as well, and the building of a community. For me, it became more important to build community along with building this knowledge. But also, as a professor that I am now based in Berlin, I also see the act of building the knowledge as an opportunity to be created in the way we develop technologies, in the way we build buildings. Each building is an opportunity to create and build this kind of knowledge and to build community while we build buildings. In that respect, I want to summarize the key problems we have in today's society. We cannot wish away those problems. They are there. And to give names to some of them, the early images are not very attractive. I have to prepare you because the world is also not so attractive, at the moment. I would like to use these images to show the problem, one image per problem, the key problems we have in today's urbanization, the rapid urbanization. Look, this is a picture in India, but the point is there is a growing population. And if you take the case of India, 1/6 of the population lives in India and 1/6 lives in China. But in India, the population occupies only 2.4% of the world's land. So we do not have the access to that many resources that, say, developed countries like Europe and America have been spending. And because we do not have this kind of resources, because we have many more mouths to feed, we have to decide if you want to give cake to a few people and others have nothing to eat, or should we cut the cake in smaller pieces, or whether we have to eat something simpler and eat cake only on birthdays and things like that. We have to decide, So population is a huge crisis. The worrying thing is that the consumption per person in today's time has been unprecedented. We are a race who consumes way more than our ancestors have ever consumed. Neither our cities are more beautiful, nor are we more happy. We are much more maybe unhappy almost, you know. We have never seen that much need for therapy and all those things. So everything has to be seen holistically. So if more consumption is going to happen and more people are going to need homes in the way we are defining all this, it's a big problem. Then there is another problem in the world, which is about unforeseen migration, rural-urban migration. Most part of India was still, you know, living very simply in the villages, but we all know how much more we consume in urban life as opposed to rural life. I mean, in villages, you would add a room, change some small things in your family home, but the moment you have migration, everybody needs a new home. It has to be paid. It has to be created. All these new cities have to come up, and it's a huge, unprecedented kind of infrastructure, which cannot be compared with when Europe and America urbanized. People are applying the same thinking into the new cities, but it's not working because the migration is huge. Then there is globalization, and globalization is creating aspirations in very simple places to have centrally air-conditioned buildings. It may be normal in Europe, it may be normal in America. This is not possible if every Chinese, every African, every Indian, if everybody is going to have only this definition for a workplace. First of all, it's not even comfortable, you know. We can't open windows. We can do nothing. We are like in a box, like a cage. All the materials have you know, changed the air qualities. We are not feeling well in these buildings, and yet this is the new aspiration because globalization, through the companies that they are building in all these countries, they want to provide the same working standard to employees who will go from here to there, and then the people in those countries feel this is the latest thing, and you know, so rather than on a global perspective, rather than reducing the consumption, we've got in Europe, we are talking about reducing a bit of energy, you get a green building certificate, but we are going into other countries where we are creating, even if you create green buildings according to European definition, you will create a huge consumption, and we do not have the resources to build all these countries in that way. And finally, what this really looks like on the ground is social segregation. In order to build, you see there are 3 skylines. This is the outskirts of Delhi. You see there is a middle scale of random, you know, development along highways. Then there is the organized, developer-driven, speculative housing. And to build all of that, you have to create migration, and all these people are going to occupy and create. As much as you build that building and ignore it, you are actively creating slums. And the informal development is actually a part of the formal development, but we are not looking at it. So even in cities where I have lived in Europe, like Madrid, and I don't know, I have seen whether it is Venice or everywhere, old cities are becoming unaffordable to their own residents. And because of tourism, so in Europe, you achieved social equality and all of that long ago. And yet, we are creating social segregation on account of affordability. Who can afford rent, who cannot afford rent. And that's because also the housing standard, the way it's being defined, it's for the insurance, for the way of building modern technology, sorry to point, but it comes at a price, and it comes at a price that everybody cannot afford. And so we are creating new social segregation, which is very worrying. This will be the future skyline everywhere if we do not take cognizance of this development and reverse. And finally, since I would summarize that the materiality of architecture in today's world is one of the biggest environmental concerns, you know, high energy materials are become the norm. It is, we choose materials without realizing the environmental impact, because to be contemporary rather than focusing on the design, the form, the space, the well-being of the human, it has come down to becoming associated to which material you used, you know. In clothing, in food, it's not like that, you know, expensive, you know, good quality. If it's a handmade leather shoe, you will still not say, oh, that's so vernacular. Good designers are, I mean, good bio food, it comes at its cost, but it is here what is happening in architecture is that things which are being valued or which are habitually being consumed are not, the impact of it is not, the knowledge of its impact is not integrated in the design decision. So this kind of concerns have already been there when I graduated. That's why 30 years ago I was taking a lot of time to really look at what kind of technologies to use. Many people say that, think of technology as something only high-tech. Nowadays, if you say technology, they will associate you with something very digital or something very industrial, but actually low-tech, or there shouldn't be a thing like low-tech and high-tech, actually, because technology is just how you put different materials together. And whether, how much man-made, how much machine-made, all those decisions are design decisions. So there is a huge problem that the vernacular material of today's time is a highly industrialized, high energy consumption materials that you can only combine with high skills, so you cannot employ your local artisan anymore. You have to give the contracts to very big companies who are very corporate, they have huge overheads, and the jobs are being located far away, and people who have local skills and local materials are being alienated. So with this kind of worries, when I started as an architect, I want to show you my first project actually, because it was my own house. And I'm from the big city. I came, even though some of my work will not suggest it, I grew up in Bombay, in that very crowded city I showed you. And, you know, many times my work is judged because I come from India in this kind of context, and they think, you know, that you won't be able to do high tech and so on. But in reality, the tallest buildings are in all these kind of countries, because we have a land crunch, you know. In Europe, almost we can really go more low tech, because the cities are by and large quite low. They don't even need elevators in many cities. And so, you know, there's a lot that can be done in Europe. But anyway, to find out and to take time, you know, to take time to think, I came out of my school and I started traveling, and not very normal for an Indian woman in that time to take a motorbike and just go, you know. So I did some personal adventures, took some personal risk to be able to think, what will I do with my time, and to not have the anxiety to just go and work for certain kind of companies where you have a job, but you are not allowed to think anymore, and, you know, not to be able to contribute as an intelligent human being. So during those years, this is how I made myself a hut to live in a budget that allowed me to still be an architect, you know, and, you know, I just did this kind of adventure. I went to live in Auroville. I was living in a hut which took a week to build in a budget that was affordable, and with people who knew how to build these things, because a lot of India lives very simply. And I felt that I wanted to try to start designing those details. You know, it was a hut, but it was kind of architectural, I have to say. And it was my first, you know, need to produce a basic living unit. It was plugged into the solar panels. It was completely decentralized. I did not realize at that time that through that decision, it will come up many more, you know, let's say low impact buildings will come out of this life experience. I landed up living in that for 10 years while I was building for other people, but I realized through the everyday life, simple life, where I had taken the time, I reduced my overheads, you know, in order to be able to just have time to not to work for people I didn't want to not to get a salary just for only my own petty existence, and want to do bigger things with my imagination. I didn't realize all of this will be very instrumental in getting me where I am today. But I started realizing the importance of taking time. Taking time to think leads to taking courage to take decisions, and also the decision to not do some things. Not only what you do is your CV, it's also what you didn't do, And that was for me very, very important, to be able to not do certain things, to be able to have a life of some restraint, and to be able to face myself every day in a, with some honor and some, continue to work and on visions that that I may or may not be able to realize, but at least I don't feel bad about, or that I can positively feel good about the process and the product. So, in fact, next year I have an exhibition, a solo show at Denmark's Louisiana Museum of Modern Art, and the topic is taking time, because I will show what I feel time is a resource. It's not money really. What we all have as living beings is the time. We have brains, we have muscles, we have a lot of human resources, and I now see those resources as very important rather than spending natural resources while saving human resources, saving on time to think, saving on human muscles, saving on human imagination, and thinking that time is money, we better pay for less time of humans. I think that has led to all the problems. So I initially produced a lot of houses with kind of very simple, very natural, recycling water meant just catch your shower water and directly feed the banana plant. So everything was very basic, but feeling direct fulfillment with such a life, it gave me the right mood to produce proper architecture with the same values. Because also people would come to my house and, feel like they could feel what can be done. So I will just walk you a little bit through the process, because as I said, for me, process is almost more important than a product, because a good process will always lead to a good product. Maybe it takes more time to see the results, but the knowledge acquired will start to show and come out of the DNA of the solution, rather than a superficial beauty that is looked for, or a superficial short-term thinking. So, when I had at Venice Biennale, when I showed my work in 2016, we were asked to give a sketch to the curators, and I had given the sketch because when I talk about knowledge, it's the part that you don't see. It's what goes on in the studio, and I wanted to show that part, that the quest for knowledge, it leads to all these fruits, it leads to a certain kind of tree, it leads to the roots are the origin of the tree, and the frontier between ignorance and knowledge is where you create innovation, and from where actually new buildings can emerge. And the fruits could be very diverse. The expression of the architecture could be very different because it can be locally applied, but the knowledge is always universal, even if the site-appropriate solutions are found. So instead of showing projects which are just the fruits, like we always see in media, I wanted to show really what is the process for architects. The process is one of synthesis. The tree trunk, it takes all very different unconnected concerns, but it works it all in, and all the expression comes out of that. And I think that's why architects can really help in the future to create a new future, better future for human society, because we have been taught, if you don't look at styles and superficial concerns, we have been taught everywhere, in all architecture schools, how to synthesize different concerns into a unified through a design process. So my process, I'm going to walk you through the process, is just to begin with the place. In a increasingly uprooted society. We are all from anywhere, living anywhere. It's going to increase. All the more, architecture needs to be rooted. It cannot be as rootless, because that creates a lot of problems. And I think, like, you come to Bologna and you walk in those walkways, you know this is Bologna, and it's something of a local character which comes out of the place over time. And this is very important to uproot, even more important to root down the uprooted people. And this decision will automatically create technology choices and materiality of architecture which is not causing sustainability issues or environmental problems, which is socio-economically beneficial. So to begin at the place, I like to understand, that architecture is only life-centric. It begins with what is, if the life and needs of human society is central. It's not about how pretty an object looks in whatever landscape. It is only there to be a backdrop for life to take place. And it must facilitate that kind of celebration of life. But there is the question of the livelihood also. People who are associated with those materials choices, whether you take a local material, whether the local labor is involved or not, there are a lot of people whose livelihood has to do with the making of buildings. Not only the people you see on the site, the people who make the bricks, the people who make the steel, the people, all these companies who make electrical products, the building industry is huge, and the kind of things we produce has a huge impact. Almost everybody is involved in the using of architecture or making of architecture. So, or making and using of architecture. The ones who are using architecture, they are concerned with the negative spaces, the void. The design of the void is the important one for the human well-being. So we have not to be obsessed with any kind of fetishes about materials, And we can be more judicious about, so the life is influenced by the architectural decision in two ways. The spaces, if we stop giving importance to them, they go out of the human scale and we don't have well-being. So that has to be brought back. On the other hand, the livelihood of the people around, all the artisans, all the crafts, all the knowledge, that it can only be acquired over generations. It cannot be just forgotten overnight because of choosing materials from the catalogs which are ready-made without thinking for ourselves. What is the impact? So myself, the way I started learning about all this is because I had taken the time when I was living in the hut. I used to go out with my motorbike and understand. I started observing that how the making of materials are deeply embedded in the way a territory functions. So for example, I take the example of brick making in India because, we are in the ceramic, place, and I want to show you also my research with this material. So brick is the first material humans made when we learned with fire. It's also the most durable material. And nowadays, we measure if it takes a lot of energy to make or not, only from the quantity of energy, but not from the quality of energy, Whereas I started discovering the difference between a factory consumption or a local one, even if the quality is lower sometimes, because the earth has a lower capacity, or the fuel, it could be, the fuel was being grown through wood by the people themselves, through branches and biofuels, etc. So I started observing, and what really struck me was I found that all the local material manufacturers in traditional practice were connected, the making of the material was connected to the normal, pre-industrial times. It was not creating big quarries. The people themselves were farmers in this case. So in the season when it's raining, they cannot do farming. That's when they will cut the branches, prepare the wood for the kiln. The the earth collects after the rain in one spot, so the clay will be taken in that season. So it's a whole cycle. Now today, if I stop ordering the local brick and I go for the factory brick, I started realizing that the agriculture is also collapsing, the wood growing is collapsing. You know, the wood that they grow to burn the clay were only branches of casuarina that was grown in these regions to be scaffolding material for building, because the wood is very straight. So the bigger branch is used for that, the smaller branch is used for this. In 3 years, you can harvest these branches you can harvest every year. So there was all these cycles which were connected. And now, like when you play that game of Jenga, you take out one piece. If you took out the right piece, the tower can balance. If you take out the wrong piece, everything will collapse. And we don't know we are responsible for the collapse. We think, I just made a micro decision, I just ordered this, and why you will never feel responsible. That is the problem of today, that we never feel responsible when the tower collapses, because there are many micro decisions. But what we could do though, and that is my attempt, through engineering and through knowledge, you know which piece you should take out to make a longer tower with the same material, to make a bigger stable structure, you know. So I started discovering that, you know, the connection of building materials in the territory. This is the making of lime. You know, there are communities who only do this work. Tomorrow, if I'm going to order Portland cement, because I came out of architecture school and I don't know about this, I don't know in the norms, they don't tell you all that. They only tell you about industrial materials. So all these people who are graduates, they decide against this. And these people lose their jobs overnight. And then when they lose their jobs, they also cannot afford to produce food, because the food we paid for, the rice that they were growing the rest of the year, was subsidized by the fact that they also sold brick. So everything is collapsing without anything real being offered. These are stone craftsmen who still hand chip the granite that you see in Europe everywhere used, you know, a stone. It's still being produced like that in India, you know. Wherever the context, you see the territory and the material, but the skill that took many generations to develop, which we are overnight forgetting. So I started producing an architecture with local material, with local skills, to demonstrate that contemporary aesthetics have not to do with contemporary so-called only industrial materials, but the design choices are in the proportion, in the combinations of the space, the technique to use minimum granite, like in an arch, to make it self-supporting in an efficient way, and yet it's a luxury to be able to spend handcrafted, you know, so much time in making it. But this is forever. So if this stone, after this was used in this exhibition, it was removed and it was bought by somebody to do in their interiors, in a living, in a lounge, you know. So good materials will have a whole lot of applications forever, and it won't harm anything. In fact, the money that we spend in such direction goes directly to the people. So rather than the notion of time is money, let's save on the money of humans and salaries, my simple formula for sustainability is spend more on human resources in order to save natural resources. And these solutions will always be good. It will go through the hand care. If, you know, each human will do it in their way, but they will leave a very nice imprint and a feeling, just like eating a handmade cake is better than an industrial one, you know. So the industries shouldn't get angry with me. I'm not against industries. I'm just saying we should negotiate the balance between handmade and machine-made, you know, and not assume that if you cut back on people's time, we are doing anything, you know, maybe we are not evolving as a society because we don't have time to think and to apply our knowledge. So I started doing projects with, initially, even when people say it's not affordable to use this material because there's a lot of human labor involved, I found when I actually work out the details, it was more affordable. Again, this I realized was a myth. And I thought, okay, maybe it's only true in India and not in Europe. I have also realized that is also a myth. Because maybe in some cases, you have to work out the exact scenario. I feel you can't have a generalization, but we must consider using people who know how to do things, as opposed to taking somebody from far away without the engagement in their region. So I started to critically examine, determine what is a local material and local skill. Critically, because I'm not just applying the vernacular skill, you know. It's not as if everything that was done before can be done. In our region, we have a lot of ceramic tiles or a terracotta tile construction, but we don't have the wood anymore to build it. So should I stop also using the tile? Or should I invent only what is required? So we need a lot of reinventing has to be done. Sometimes you have a skill, the material is not there. That skill can be applied. So through this kind of method, you see here when I just began my practice very early, not knowing anything almost, I realized also it's not important to know already. It's important, if you wait to know everything and then apply, you will not do anything, any innovation. I think by wanting to do it, you will develop the knowledge because you know somehow that is more intelligent. And if you don't know, there are some other people who know. And that's what I mean by building community. So I used to see all these potters community who couldn't sell pots anymore. And it began by producing you see with coconut shells, you know, producing terracotta roofing elements so that we can give employment and livelihood to the people who are no longer able to sell the cooking pots they were making. It's used only as a decoration on once a year. People do a festival and they use. So, but there is a knowledge there. So how to apply? On the other hand, there is urbanization which is stealing their jobs. So how can you guarantee livelihood to the people with skills through urbanization by looking at what the skills are and how can it be leading to a technological innovation that can actually negotiate between the high-tech, low-tech, machine-made, handmade, and through knowledge produce, contemporary for me is this, to produce technologies that are integrally good for us. So through the knowledge of, you know, instead of using slope roofs, to use catenary roofs, you know, we all had the glory of, you know, the knowledge from the Romans of building, you know, vaults and domes and all that. And at one point when concrete came in, we stopped using it. But in this case, you see again, using that kind of knowledge of our whole civilization, you can produce roofing systems. I felt if you want to use the terracotta, but there's no wood to support it, it's better to build, I mean, if people are not using, you know, thin terracotta tiles also have another problem. It's not climatically comfortable because it collects the heat. So insulation helps, but it also helps to stabilize. This kind of a system can be built without any structural steel. And that was my first project while I was living in a hut. I had, fortunately, a French client who let me build his house, huge house. And I told him that he used to always want me to compromise my design because, you know, they always feel they give you a chance to do a project when you're beginning your career. So I used to tell him, okay, I'm ready to change everything, but not the roof, because I want to at least one thing, you know, save. So I believe in little by little, you know, through that, through this solution, you know, I started having a relationship to the potters community. You see, they were making, this is the traditional cooking pot. I'm sure in other countries they also use cooking pot. We use it for rice. There are some, I don't know if paella was also originally using, you know, ceramic pot. Maybe we have to try risotto. But, you know, they were using this also to make yogurt because there is some porosity inside this pot, and belongs to the cooking, but now nobody is using it. So many years later, I got an idea, because once you know communities, you get more ideas of how you can, use their skills or how to engage what is already working. Look at the landscape compared to a normal industry. These are people who live there. They do this. They don't do only this. This is one of the whole families involved when they are doing a firing. But the rest of the time, they will do their own other jobs. The children, they'll fire it in the weekend. Everybody, the family is involved. So with coconut shells, they produce it. And later, I got an idea how I could make efficient concrete roofs by using this as formwork. Concrete, there was a time, you see the work of Nervi and other people of that generation, who were doing shells, and, the form work is very expensive to make these shapes. So people in our age of time is money age, they start to use more concrete. People in the 60s, Candela, all of them, they were trying to use very little concrete by using intelligent shapes. Today, what we say, oh, forget it. Who will do the form work? It will be too expensive. Let us use more concrete and make it flat. Let us use more steel, it's cheaper. So we started making those bad environmental decisions in architecture. Here what I did is, to take that idea further, you can look the amount of steel required for a flat slab, if you put slight curves in it, and to make the form work affordable, I start to use the shape of these pots to make a lost shuttering, a formwork which can remain with the concrete, and cast a efficient concrete which requires only 33% of the steel. There would have been 2 bars between those in a normal concrete slab. And now we save all that. So it looks like a lot of work to make those savings, but this is the way I feel the future should go. These are other things I started doing with terracotta, other type of ceilings which are insulated. So the roof I showed you in the beginning has to have that shape, but it can be used on the uppermost level. But for the in-between slabs, you don't need insulation. So I started to make, for all scenario, a kind of grammar of many other things that we could start producing with the skills, so that the rapid urbanization can give more jobs to the people who already have the skills, who already know how to use local materials. So whenever I go to a new site, I look, what are the people making? And I try to give at least some part of the economic budget into that direction. And through that, I know that the building will be automatically ecological. Even when you measure, you can see. So eventually, even I found, when I did all these studies, I found that the handmade bricks in my area, which were very irregular, they were like the old Roman bricks, which are non-industrial, very thin, made to hold easily in a hand. Nobody is getting tired to do it, because it's it's like painting. It's not like an industrial thing, You don't have to be so strong to do all these things. You don't need so many machines also. So those bricks are very thin, and I realized they were still being made in the local area, and yes, they were less strong than the industrial brick, because the industrial brick takes optimum clay quality, makes huge quarries where the clay is ideal, the coal is ideal, and so on. And I said, who needs all this ideal thing? If I design backwards, this is what we have. Our clay cannot be stronger than this brick, So I realized that the bad bricks are actually the good bricks in our times. And I realized that if I have to use it, I need to make the wall thicker, which is in turn good because of the climate and the insulation and so on. So my house, when I moved from the hut, I made this house. And, it became very known eventually, because there's a lot of terracotta roofs. And the whole thing is like an experiment. All the things were tested here, so that I don't waste the client's money, but test in my own space. So then I got a very big house from that very simple life I had. But still, it's quite empty and simple, actually. It's just built mostly to test all these things. And Ferro-Cement, you see in the background, you see those big screens. Those are Ferro-Cement, which is something also Nervi actually used for the first time to make lost shuttering formwork. And for some reason, Ferro-Cement did not get so popular as reinforced concrete. Maybe it is more profitable to do concrete. Nowadays, I'm thinking also about that, maybe it's easy, you require more knowledge to use Ferro-Cement, to calculate it. It's a surface structure, you need more knowledge. And I think now my theory is that people are making choices where, because they know less than the grandfathers, so I think they are making choices because they don't know, and they are always scared what will happen with the insurance and if the building will fall down, because they are thinking more of failure than their knowledge to let them succeed, I'm seriously thinking in those directions now about our society. But basically, in my own final house, a lot of, these are colored cement pigments, and a lot of experimentation was done. This is bathrooms, not using, see, I'm not saying you shouldn't use factory tiles. This project was in a rural area, so I want to bring what is near me. Why should I take it when there is no factory nearby? So I tried to make impervious garden-like bathroom. So experimentation is a very important thing for our times, and sometimes experimentation could be also radical, and I think we need to create room for experimentation in architecture. When we have to build so many new cities, so much of, why are we not creating room for research and budgets for that? We want guaranteed solutions because of insurances, and we are paying so much for all those insurances, actually, and overheads. I wish some of that money would be applied to solutions which will give people hope, which can be done in the universities, where we can, spread the building of knowledge. This is a project, most experimental, most radical thing I ever did. Baking big mud houses in situ, building a big house and cooking it into ceramic on the spot. So why are we doing this? Because I got so involved in brick making, and I realized that in most, either you have the low-tech kiln, where the brick stacking itself is the kiln, or in the industries, they make ovens, which the Hoffman kiln and all that, about 40% of the energy goes into the kiln wall. So you keep on having to heat your oven, but kiln, and 40% of the heat you're generating keep on getting lost in the wall of the kiln. So there was a ceramic artist called Ray Meeker from California. He was living in India, and he was trying to solve this technology, and I did some houses in this direction. What if we cook the bricks in pots, in an oven that changes? Later it becomes we find insulation, we manage to cook the whole wall, and that becomes the house for somebody. So it's baking the mud house in situ to make it into a waterproof ceramic house with mud joints, so you don't even need cement. And the fire cost, fuel, can be attributed to the products anyway, you're doing ceramic, but somebody is getting a house for the fixed house for the price of a mud house. Very ambitious, radical experiment. I did my PhD on that. I did 3 projects in this. This is just an example of what that is about. You build a mud house with mud joints, and you cook bricks in it. You arrange things, and you create a big fire, sell the bricks to recover the cost of your house, and then again you use broken or whatever ceramic things you find to waterproof it. So these are some of the radical things where people's participation is given a lot of value, because even in urban context, this is a co-housing project done with rammed earth. I always choose some technologies where anybody could be employed, because many people who will be homeowners, they should be able to offset the cost of their house if they want to through their work. Like in olden days, people would build all their own houses. Now Now it's the other extreme. You cannot do anything. You cannot even paint a wall. You need degrees for everything. So all this is making the house very expensive. And this is the co-housing project, that was done at a very modest budget. We have to rethink materials. One of the investigations I'm doing since I live in Europe is looking at urban waste as a building material, where in Venice, what we had done is we did the same roof in the Biennale with wine bottles, just to teach the students also, but often using what you have, or broken glasses, etc., to use it into construction, And, sometimes when there's no money, you take what you have and you try to buy the least material. You use all the urban waste and you let the architecture be shaped a little bit through that. And using local materials, including urban waste, you involve local people into the project, so that you need to think a little bit with your hands, again, like the good old days, because there is a lot of intelligence in that. Up to the Bauhaus times, we were still working close to the materiality, and now we don't have, the architecture studio looks like any other company. So we did projects with very unconventional materials, like old books, catalogs, and lots of books are being destroyed, burnt, etc. It's a big environmental problem. We've been making sofas, and in this case, we packed it in vacuum packing to produce a project for Barcelona, where I was asked to build a pavilion. And since I wanted to use a very local technology, I was realizing all the fine ham and olives and all of that, this very vernacular way of packing. We used that kind of vacuum packing of books in order to use these open books. It was an art statement also to invest in knowledge, taking old books, letting them be open at least one time, before they die. And we made canopies out of it, for example. So there are a lot of installations, like here, for example, that you need it for 3 or 4 months. So why not build with the waste, and then you let it have a few cycles of use. And you see, it is perfectly fitting to the spot, the geometry, the way the material comes together. It belongs. It doesn't have to be so precious, I think, to be perceived as precious, because the people's time and intelligence, when it goes into the building, everybody feels it's luxurious. I'm also working with waste textile, denim right now, because most people wearing jeans. I see a lot of jeans also here. They are made mostly in India and China, and all the rest of those material are left, whatever is not in the pattern. It's a big environmental crisis. So we are trying to use developing, patterns to be able to use without elasticity in an intelligent way for tensile structures, etc. So this is what I'm doing in my design studio. I try to give people a real encounter with real people, real material, real scale. These are students of the AA in London, and have that real encounter in 10 days or so, do a workshop, build a real thing, and go back to reality. Because if you don't escape from reality in academia, but go deep in the reality, you can really contribute to the better world. It's not difficult. Every person can be empowered. Instead of telling them you don't know, empower them. So, running out of time. How is the time going? Time. Okay. So, I'm just going to show the images quickly of things we are doing in the school. As a teacher, I'm doing sometimes. This is in Mexico. We build Tetra Pak. I'm not saying this is the material of the future. I don't want to sponsor even the waste material, in fact, so they keep on feeling less guilty. But take what you have, fill it up with sand, water, use it in an innovative way, learn how to make something real, so that you learn geometry, you learn sight, you learn how to do everything in a short time, and you use your education period to produce real world solutions. So finally, I'm depending a lot on engineering. This is more about Ferro-Cement. I'm running out of time. I'm just going to give you a glimpse of how, because it's a very thin material, it is only 2.5 centimeters as opposed to concrete, which is very thick. It is very strong. It uses chicken mesh. I told you form work was complicated. I was looking at origami and other folding methods that can help you to develop forms that are so strong that you use form generation for strength rather than materials for strength. And you know, this is an idea of a form work which is collapsible in cardboard. You can close it like this. If there's a disaster relief structure to be built somewhere in 3 or 4 days, you take your chicken mesh and you plaster it, you know, and you have a permanent house. So the same material applied to a modular system with masons producing in the backyard of their houses. Whenever they have time, they make 1 or 2 pieces, and when somebody needs a house in a week, you can assemble it. The pieces have got like the stucco kind of pigmenting, which is permanent and waxed. And these are the type of things, even a low-cost toilet, that I'm producing. And nowadays, there's a big demand for me to exhibit in places, but I'm using exhibition budgets also as opportunities to build new knowledge. So rather than showing old work, I'm taking my undeveloped research where I need money. I'm using exhibition money to test those ideas, to create collaboration with engineers like we did in Venice. We worked with Mike Schleich and important engineers who we could, in a German lab, produce the elements which will go to Venice, test the things which we don't have a budget for affordable housing. And in Venice, what we did is, before we did the Biennale installation, we took the materials from the German pavilion, which they want to throw away, very costly. We only did 6 pieces in Berlin, but all the others we built out of recycling the material of a previous Biennale and use their material for the second time. This was the recuperated material from the German pavilion. And we took our students to understand the area of Marghera and all the areas where there is huge social problem of housing, etc., and how to use our installation, which is this, to have the third life cycle by building something which we are displaying here. And we had built the house before. In Venice, when we built it, we only got it engineered better and tested. And with that resource, we are also giving this afterwards to some people in the nearby area, working with the Re Biennale and other social groups, sharing the knowledge, but also investing in the knowledge of other people. This is the house that is a symbol of this kind of practice. Finally, we are taking time in the research, but finally this house can be built in 6 days. All the years I'm putting in it is a long time, but the actual house construction is as fast as anything else. And I would like to end with this image, which shows, you know, our students have gone back to Venice to dismantle the installation because we already studied where should we give it to. And in the exhibition budget, we include the third cycle, this is a group of refugees. We improve the facility of living conditions in the area of Marghera. Along with other existing social groups, we network with them, and we network with many, many different groups, and our students and the refugees together have reused all this material. So our work began before us from the German pavilion. Only the thoughts and the virtual part came from us. And then the material part we took from someone, we channeled it, and we are giving it to another group, and it will keep on living. But the ideas what we took back from Venice is the interaction and collaboration and the learning. All of us learned through this one-to-one. We went back knowing that this research we did before for cheap housing in India is in fact also strong, because the German engineers have tested some of it, and there is a lot more to be tested. We came to know what we have to do more. But knowledge is the thing I would like to say I would like to end the talk by saying that it is very, very urgent that we start valuing knowledge. And if the society has to go forward, let us invest in building knowledge and building community and go for long-term well-being and not short-term gratification. Thank you.